Welcome to Back the Culture Show, the show where we explore the lives of Jamaican national heroes. We gave you Queen Nanny. We gave you Sam Sharp. We gave you Paul Bogle. We gave you George William Gordon. Great Jamaican national heroes. But today, we explore a little bit deeper and give you a hero that is not just a Jamaican national hero, but is a worldwide national hero, where folks around the world have emulated his standards to fight for equality and human rights, self-improvement, self-reliance. Talking about Marcus Mosiah Garvey. What a great panel we got lined up for you. So many distinguished guests and speakers. But guess what? I got 3 minutes before Master Control takes over. Thanks so much for listening, for tuning in. It's going to be a great show this evening.
Marcus Garvey words come to pass.
So true.
Marcus Garvey words come to pass. Can't get no food to eat. Can't get no money to spend. Oh. Can't get no food to eat. Can't get no money to spend.
Thanks to the entire team for putting this show together.
Come, little one, oh, let me do what I can for you. And you, hello. Come, little one, come. Oh, let me
There is nothing like telling our own stories.
for you.
That is what we do right here on the Back the Culture Show, Jamaican National Era Series.
You know the right hand do it.
Today we celebrate Marcus Garvey.
With many strides.
Marcus Garvey
Is the key.
and said,
Unity
me.
is the key.
Garvey
Stand for something is the key.
does not leave me. Naya Bingi, Bobo Shanti.
His words live on today. So we celebrate him. Marcus Garvey. We are kings and queens.
Hey, listen, the blood of African kings run in my vein. Here in that Jamaica, rebellious offspring. We've got a warrior spirit inside. From that time, we can't change. And this warrior spirit inside, it come from break every shackle and chain. Mana Shaka Zulu, Whitney, and Kuma, Whitney, Kunta Kinte, Whitney. Just like Malcolm and Martin and Marcus and Fiery, Kuma, Whitney, Vela Kute, Whitney, Kunta Kinte, Whitney. Just like Garvey and Marley and Fiery. Look how many years them whip with. That's where they whip power microchip with. And I don't think Babylon style of fit me. Buckle it out, come make we get to with victory. And fight my brother and sister. And when
I could play songs all evening. But we need to get to the meat of the matter. We need to get to the show. So I'm going to turn over to Master Control. And they're going to take over from here and introduce our distinguished guests and get this show started, all right? So thank you so much for tuning in. Oh, one favor. Please share. They say sharing is caring. Master Control takes over.
Eternal Father, bless our land. Guard us with thy mighty hand. Keep us free from evil eyes. Be our light through countless eyes. To our leaders, great defender, grant true wisdom from above. Justice, truth be yours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, 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 land we love. Teach us true respect for all. Stir response to duty's call. Strengthen us the weak to cherish. Give us vision lest we perish. Knowledge send us, Heavenly Father. Grant true wisdom from above. Justice, truth be yours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, 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 land we love.
My fellow Jamaicans at home and in the diaspora, friends of Jamaica, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It gives me great pleasure to participate in today's Jamaica Heroes Modernized Back to Culture Show as part of Jamaica's 60th monthly series. Please allow me, therefore, to start by thanking my friend Charles, founder and executive producer of Jamaica Heroes Modernized, for inviting me to be part of today's show. This year, we celebrate Jamaica's 60th anniversary of independence, our Diamond Jubilee, under the theme, Reigniting a Nation. In this regard, I am very proud of the work being undertaken by Mr. Smart and his hardworking team for organizing this most timely series. I am particularly pleased that this series will highlight the achievements of each Jamaican national hero, monthly as a special contributing to our annual grand celebration of Jamaica's 60th. For this reason, I am so pleased at today's celebration. Let us remember that despite our challenges and struggles, we have the power to create change for ourselves and for future generations. It is true that as a people and as a nation, we have come a far way. We have overcome numerous challenges since our independence and have blazed a trail of excellence admired by millions worldwide. We have achieved significant milestones and made remarkable contributions to all levels globally. As we push forward and embrace the changes that continue to mold our country for the future, it is important that we continue to reflect on our early beginnings. We must never forget those who have played an integral role in the birth of our nation through service and sacrifice for the prosperity and freedom of our people. Without them, we would not be the proud Jamaicans who we are today, the innovative thinkers and fearless leaders. Let us draw on the strength of our forefathers and work steadfast in the improvement of our lives, our communities, and our homeland Jamaica. I wish you all a wonderful evening and happy 60th Jamaica. One love.
Hi, I'm Ann Thornley Brown. Today I'm interviewing Roy T. Anderson, writer, producer, and director of African Redemption, The Life and Legacy of Marcus Garvey. What made you decide to do the film?
Before I answer that question, I have to thank Dr. Garvey because he's the one that planted the seed for African Redemption. But before I say anything about that, I just want to thank the Jamaica National Heroes Project for this amazing platform today, for us to get the word out about what we're doing. But back to your question, Marcus Garvey has been presented in a less than positive light, especially in the textbooks and more specifically on screen. So I wanted to make the definitive documentary on Marcus Garvey. We had our world premiere last year, September, at the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. Great reception. And then afterwards, it screened at the Belize International Festival and the Los Angeles Documentary Film Festival, where we picked up an award for Best Historical Documentary, Best Narrator. And in Nigeria, we won the award for Best Diaspora Documentary. And so that's 2021. And then at the beginning of 22, we had an amazing screening at the BFI South Bank in London. 450 people packed that theater. You can just imagine, after 2 years of lockdown, people were just hungry for cinema. And what I noticed was that it's not only a hunger, but there was just a thirst for all things Marcus Garvey. Folks, they wanted to know so much about this man. And I was glad that I was able to reintroduce them to Marcus Garvey.
The black man's Messiah was born Malcus Mosiah Garvey. His philosophies and teachings have impacted many social and political movements around the world. He especially had an outsized influence in Black America, where the cries for racial justice and equality continue to echo to this very day. Marcus Garvey was the first to preach forcefully and unabashedly that black people had the right to control their own destiny.
He was very bright, he was very assertive, and he's gaining this power in the black community. It's not just those West Indians, it's all kinds of black folks who are glad to hear this guy saying a lot of things that needed to be said.
In order to fully understand his place in history, imagine a world as it looked to him and many other blacks during the early part of the 20th century.
What we saw was a rise of incredible violence against black people. Black people were fighting for their rights, and the response was a lynching, one every other day for 3 decades.
Marcus Garvey would lead the largest mass movement of black people in history. The geographic breadth and scope of the movement remain almost unfathomable today.
Up, you mighty race!
Up, you mighty race!
Up, you mighty race. You can accomplish what you will.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Steve Higgins of Steve Higgins Productions. The Universal Negro Improvement Association and the African Communities League was founded by Jamaica's first national hero, Marcus Mosiah Garvey and Amy Garvey. The UNIA had its anthem. I now am pleased to present to you the UNIA anthem.
Ethiopia, the land of our fathers, the land where the gods love to be. As storm clouds at night sudden gathers, our armies come rushing to thee. We must in this fight be victorious, where swords are thrust outwards to glean. For us will the victory be glorious, when led by the red, black, and green. Advance, advance to victory, let Africa be free. Advance to meet the foe, advance to meet the foe, with the might of the red, the black, and the green, with the might of the red, the black, My children are lustily calling from over the distant seas. Jehovah, the great one, has heard us. He has noted our sighs and our tears. With the spirit of love, he has stirred us to be one through the coming years. Advance, advance to victory, let Africa be free. Advance to meet the foe, advance to meet the foe, with the might of the red, the black, and the green, with the might of the red, the black, and the green. O Jehovah, the God of the ages, grant unto thy sons that lead the wisdom thou gave to thy sages when Israel was sore in need. Thy voice through the dim pass has spoken, Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hand. By thee shall our fetters be broken, and heaven bless our dear fatherland. Advance, advance to victory, let Africa be free. Advance to meet the foe, advance to meet the foe, with the might of the red, the black, and the green, with the might of the red, the black, and the green.
Was the anthem of the UNIA. Now, I hope that you log on to www.stevehigginsproductions.com. That's www.stevehigginsproductions.com, and join us as we celebrate Jamaica's 60th anniversary.
Good evening, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be here with you in this very, very special program where we revive, shall we say, and modernize our heroes. I'm Julius Garvey, and I am the second son of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, our first in time, our first national hero, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. My older brother, Marcus Jr., died last December. Our heroes are important to us because they're the ones who have sacrificed their lives and their time, and even literally their lives, such as Sam Sharp, Paul Bogle, and George William Gordon, and others who really laid down their lives, for us to be who we are in terms of an independent Jamaica and citizens of an independent Jamaica, hopefully to become a republic soon, because that's also part of the journey. I'm particularly, proud of my father in that I learned about my father from my mother largely, because the last time I saw my father, I was 5 years old. He died, that was in England. We had gone there with him in 1935, and we came back to Jamaica. And the last time, well, I was 7 years old when he died. He died in England, and family was back in Jamaica. So I learned a lot about my father from my mother, and I learned to worship him as a hero. Certainly, he was my hero growing up. And I was very, very glad in 1964 when he became Jamaica's hero. And he's my hero because he espoused the cause of African people worldwide, in Jamaica, in the colonies, the British colonies in the Caribbean, as well as the colonies in Africa, and also in terms of the precursor of the civil rights movement here in the United States of America. I'm currently living in New York. I'm a citizen of the US, but I haven't given up my Jamaican citizenship. So I do have dual citizenship. So I still cling to that as that's my roots. I'm a Jamaican, and everywhere I go, I'm an African person who was born in Jamaica. I live in America, but that's my birthright, and that can't be taken away from me. And I'm very, very proud of all of our heroes, and I'm especially proud of my father. His work was phenomenal because it was a time post-slavery. He was born in 1887. Slavery ended, we can call it 1834, 1838, but in any event, he grew up in the colonial period, and he rebelled against that in terms of his own formation, in terms of his own understanding of himself and his African heritage as a human being. So he fought against the oppression of his humanity. And then he was, how should I put it, visionary enough to be able to create an organization, but to create the philosophy behind the organization and the organizational structure that would liberate us from the system that had colonized us and enslaved us. And that was based fundamentally on an African understanding of us as human beings. It was spiritual primarily, mental secondarily, and then physical tertiary, because that's who we are. His organization embodied all of that. It was definitely people first, and I like to call it African humanism. As my father said, we must liberate our minds from mental slavery, and of course, Brother Bob popularized it. And he also said that we must redeem Africa. So I'm very pleased in terms of what my father did in terms of his sacrifice. Now, of course, when you go up against the power structure, meaning the colonizers such as Britain and France, as well as Belgium and others, and of course the apartheid system here in the United States at that time in the early 20s, then you get the blowback to your mission of empowerment for African people. And he was attacked, he was vilified, but he stayed strong. He was brought up on false charges with no evidence, an empty envelope, certainly a political trial. And he paid his price, 2 years and 9 months in Atlanta prison. And then he was released but deported back to Jamaica. But then he made his contributions to the Jamaica political scene and the Caribbean scene in general. You know, we've been on a bit of a mission to exonerate him here in the United States. He's honored, you know, all over the world. He's honored in Jamaica, obviously, but he's honored also at the Organization of African States in Washington, D.C., where he's a hero of the Americas. And interesting enough, of course, the United States of America is one of those American states, but he's still vilified here in terms of the lingering charge against him, which, as I say, was totally unsubstantiated. So we have been involved in trying to clear his name, certainly as long ago as 1987, myself and my brother. We went before the House Judiciary Committee, and this was John Conyers, who was the congressperson at the present time, who was in charge of that. He had us down there. We gave testimony along with several people such as John Henry Clark, Tony Martin, Bobby Hill, Judith Stein, and of course our own Jamaican ambassador, Keith Johnson, testifying to his innocence. Over time, you know, Honorable Charles Rangel, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee over many, many years, co-sponsored many House resolutions to exonerate Marcus Garvey. And none of these were honored. In 2016, with our Black president, shall we say, first Black president, the second term, we figured this was a no-brainer. And so we petitioned then President Obama to clear his name by issuing a posthumous presidential pardon, declaring his innocence. The analysis of the trial, how illegal it was and unjust, was well documented by a Washington-based law firm, Aiken, Gump, Strauss, Howard, and Feld, who had done the legal work for us pro bono and has been with us, you know, since more than 10 years on this journey. The petition was supported by the Congressional Black Caucus, former Ambassador Andrew Young, Mandela's grandson, Professor Charles Ogletree. He was the professor at Harvard Law School for Obama, and on and on. The NAACP, National Bar Association, many others who supported us. And now this was placed before the acting pardon attorney, who was Robert Zalsner. And it was delivered to the president himself by Vernon Jordan, a prominent Democratic politician and a member of the ACLE team. But no action was taken by President Obama. I can also say parenthetically that when Obama was in Jamaica, Portia Simpson, Honorable Portia Simpson, spoke to him, who was Prime Minister at the time, about the exoneration, the posthumous pardon. I don't know the details of the conversation, but obviously it never happened. Recently with the public murder of George Floyd, there's been a resurgence of the understanding that Black people, are still being vilified and oppressed within the system. And we have petitioned during the month of February. We led, it was the Caribbean Political Action Committee that really led a petition drive to exonerate my dad by a posthumous pardon. We definitely got more than 100,000 signatures in the month of February of this year to place in front of President Biden. Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, who is of Caribbean heritage, Jamaican heritage, Democrat of New York, she's also introduced House Resolution 148 before the Congress, asking for the exoneration of Marcus Garvey. So that's pretty much where we stand. We are waiting for some sort of response from President Biden. I know I'm hopeful that this time around we will get what we need, which is the exoneration of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, our first national hero. Again, our culture unites us, and all honor to you in terms of bigging up our heroes. It's certainly time to revitalize them and refurbish them and modernize them. And there's a movement at the present time to teach Marcus Garvey in the schools, and that's of extreme importance because the kids need to know what it is to be someone who is committed to their ideals and someone who won't give up, and someone who has the type of character that would fight for a principle, that would fight for justice, that would fight for other people, that had that compassion, that love for other people, and again, the commitment to social and economic justice. And Marcus Garvey is a great ideal for young people. So I'm happy that you're doing this job in terms of refurbishing our heroes, and I'm happy that at this time it looks as if we're going to have Marcus Garvey being taught in schools, and I hope the Prime Minister moves strenuously to have Marcus Garvey exonerated by a presidential posthumous pardon, certainly honoring our national hero on our 60th anniversary of independence. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Colin Grant. I'm coming to you from a place called Brighton on the south coast of England in the UK. My parents are Jamaican. I was born here, as they say, in the UK. But my ideas of Jamaica were informed by my parents and also by their love of Garvey. And it was my pleasure and delight to be able to write about Marcus Garvey. Joining me this evening are Jean Garvey, a retired marketing professional. She has worked in several marketing, sales, and pricing positions at the marketing giant Altria Group Incorporated, which is formerly Philip Morris Incorporated. Ms. Garvey has a long history of civic and community involvement dating back to her teenage years, not so many years ago, and has held many leadership positions in organizations in which she was involved. She sat on the boards of the Coalition of 100 Black Women, the New York chapter, the Kingston Technical High School Alumni Association, again, the New York chapter, and was a member of the A.L. Crawford New York division of the UNIA and ACL, where her husband was the local president. Welcome, Ras I. Jabalani Tafari is an author, a multimedia journalist, graphic artist, and managing editor of The Roots, Reggae and Culture magazine. One of those annoying people who has many, many hats and does them very, very well, each position that he holds. Tafari is the first dreadlock Rastafari ever to work in the newsroom at the former Jamaican Broadcasting Corporation, JBC, in Kingston, Jamaica. Also the first Rasta man in Jamaican television history to appear on camera as a TV news reporter. He's the producer of the award-winning documentary Inside South Africa and the author of A Rastafari View of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Welcome. Professor Rupert Lewis in Jamaica, a man I've met many years ago and actually helped me in the formation of my own understanding of Marcus Garvey, is a political scientist who has published extensively on Marcus Garvey's activities in Jamaica and the Caribbean region. He's also authored research about the Caribbean activist intellectual Walter Rodney. Professor Lewis has served as a member of the Council of the Institute of Jamaica and as chairman of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica and the Jamaican Memory Bank. Welcome, Rupert. Now we have Stephen Golding, who many of you will know, is the president of the Kingston division of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and the African Communities League. Professor of Garveyism, Golding chairs the Garvey Studies Department at the Hydel University in St. Catherine, Jamaica. He spent over a decade in media as a writer, host, and executive producer in radio and TV programs, and is the founding director of Jamaica's only authentic Pan-African restaurant. I wish I was over there to be able to sample the delights. In 2016, he was appointed as a member of the Jamaican National Council on Reparations, as well as the Institute of Jamaica Council and the Jamaica Memory Bank. So he crosses over there with Rupert. And finally, Moriama D. Kamau, was first introduced to the UNIA and African Communities League in 1997. By 2000, he was elected the second vice president of division number 330 of the UNIAACL Rehabilitating Committee. And by 2001, he co-founded the Marcus Garvey and Amy Garvey Work Study Group. In 2004, he actively began researching the lost and forgotten history of the UNIA, following Marcus Garvey's 1940 elevation. In 2005, he was elected president of the Washington Division, co-founded the Henrietta Vinton Davis Foundation, and co-founded the Universal Marcus Garvey Day Tribute and Celebration. He currently retains the title UNIA International Organizer and Local Organizer of the Washington Division number 183. So welcome to you all. I think we'll begin by going around the group and getting a brief idea about your association with Garvey. And I'd like to just get everybody to give me an idea about what it was about Marcus Garvey that first drew them to him. What was it about Marcus Garvey, Jean, that first drew you to your dear beloved relative, do you think?
Well, good evening, everyone. It is certainly humbling and a pleasure for me to participate among this august group of Garveyites. I want to say hello to all the Garveyites and friends. Unfortunately, I don't go all the way that far back. I did read a little about Marcus Garvey because I went to school in Jamaica. As most people know, it was not part of our curriculum going to school. I only delved into Marcus Garvey when I came to America to go to college. And I have lived in the United States for over 50 years, about 53 years to be exact. And somewhere along the line, as a divorcee, I met Marcus Garvey Jr. Well, the rest is history. And of course, with that, I delved more and more into the life of his dad. And of course, he was a historian as well as a scholar, as everyone knows. So I gained a lot of information from him.
What do you make of the idea that you studied at school at a time when he was not part of the curriculum? What do you feel about that?
I think it was a big mistake on the part of the education department in Jamaica. I think they have finally seen the light, and I understand that now they have a pilot program in the elementary schools, and that should go forward up to the tertiary level and so forth. I'm happy about that. What made me sad about that was the fact that gaining information from Marcus, his mother fought valiantly to get Garveyism taught in the school curriculum in Jamaica. She died in 1976 and never lived to see it happen. So I am thrilled that that has happened now.
I'm thrilled as well. Thank you very much. Ras Jabulani Tafari, what about your first introduction to Garvey? What interested you about the man, and what was your first interaction, as it were?
Well, growing up in Jamaica, everyone hears about Marcus Garvey, and especially from the Rastafari. So we always heard about Garvey, and being a reader like Garvey, I eventually became a journalist. And if you want a role model as a journalist, Marcus Garvey, if you have Black consciousness and the love of your people and all of this, Marcus Garvey fits the bill. So he became my role model as a journalist. And, the more we learned about Garvey from the Rasta, and the more we researched Garvey, read his books, the more the admiration for the mammoth task he took on, trying to help people emancipate themselves from mental slavery and to free a captive nation. It's a mammoth task, and Garvey undertook all of this. So the more we learned about him, the more my admiration personally grew. And eventually, I authored a book, as you mentioned, The Rastafari View of Marcus Garvey. And one of the things I take from that whole experience, I thought, okay, we've learned a lot and we know a lot about Marcus Garvey. But the more we research and learn about Garvey, up to this very minute we are talking, there is still so much about Garvey to learn that it's just amazing that this man did so much, that the world is becoming more aware of it thanks to the reggae musicians and to Rastafari. But, we're just scratching the surface of his amazing accomplishments, which have impacted the world globally. So, I am on board with anything with Garvey.
Great, thank you very much. Professor Rupert Lewis, I sat at your feet and learned about Marcus Garvey many, many years ago. You might not remember that, but whose feet did you sit at to learn about Garvey when you first was introduced to him?
Well, the decision of the Jamaican government to return the body of Garvey to Jamaica in 1964 attracted the attention of the entire Jamaican population. And debates and discussion took place about the decision the government made to have him as the first national hero, their intention. Not long after, I sought out Mrs. Amy Jakes Garvey. And my meeting with her in the late 60s, and for about 5 years until her death in 73, I visited weekly and was her research assistant, writing pseudonymous letters to the Gleaner on her instructions. But you don't meet Amy Jakes Garvey and not recognize that she was on par with Marcus, and in some respects, wiser in her judgments than he was. You don't meet her and not be affected. You don't meet Marcus Jr. and not realize brilliance as a physicist, as a mathematician, as a Pan-Africanist. And Jean Garvey, who I'm glad is with us, can attest to that. So that meeting those two individuals, mother, son, were decisive in my own intellectual formation and decision to study the life and work of the movement And I want to emphasize the movement and not only the person.
Sure. Now, there were many, many people behind the great man, weren't there? And he couldn't have achieved what he did without, especially his wives, I would say, in the first instance. Thank you very much, Professor Lewis. Stephen Golding, you've become a great disseminator in terms of educating people about Garvey, but how were you first educated about Garvey? Was he was there a name that was very popular in your household when you were growing up?
I think my exposure to Garvey at an early age was like every other Jamaican. He was our first national hero. He was on our money. His face is painted on the walls of all of our early childhood institutions. But in terms of understanding the depth of the man and really the scope of the work he did, I would say my exposure came, like Auntie Jean there, in university. While I was in the United States, I pledged a Black fraternity, the first one for Black men at the collegiate level, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Read books like Stolen Legacy and other things that really began to, open up my consciousness in a certain way, and drew for Garvey, because not only was I a Black man in America, I was a Black Jamaican in America. And here was my own first national hero who had had such great impact on that country decades before. And when I moved to New York in the late 90s, 98, 99, I found the Universal Negro Improvement Association, because one of the things that inspired me wasn't so much Garvey the man, but as Professor Lewis said, the movement around him. And what Garvey built, he didn't build by himself. And I wondered what had happened to this great institution that he had envisioned. And I found them and joined the A.L. Crawford Memorial Division in Brooklyn in 1999, then under the presidency of Marcus Garvey Jr. And the rest is history, as they say.
Thank you very much, Stephen Golding. Mariami Kamau, you were first introduced to the UNIA and African Communities League in 1997. I don't know how old you are, but I imagine that you might have been introduced to Garvey as an idea before that time. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And that's Brother Moriama Kamau, just, for pronunciation's sake. But yes, I was introduced. Actually, I had studied Mr. Garvey when I was in college. I was studying urban studies at the time, and I was looking at the history of the United States and the fight for America's independence. And I was looking at all these great heroes and patriots who shouted, "Give us liberty" or "Give us death." And I was wondering, what were Black folks doing, while everybody else was fighting for their independence? When did we fight for our independence? What did we ever do to, as Mr. Garvey would later say, evolve our own state built upon a solid industrial foundation? So as I began to study, I ran into names like Martin Robinson Delaney, Edward Wilmot Blyton, and eventually I bumped into a movement that some in the UNIA say is too high to get over, too low to get under, too wide to get around. So you just got to get in it and hope it gets in you. And that is the Garvey movement. And the Garvey movement just hit me like a blinding light. All the questions I had, Mr. Garvey himself had many years ago, and came up with the greatest movement for improvement to ever hit this planet Earth for our race. And so, but as I began to study his plans and ideas, I threw all my plans and ideas out the door, and I've been on the Garvey train ever since.
Okay, well, I hope it keeps on running. So if I could go back to Ms. Jean Garvey, I wonder what kind of family history records you have about Garvey to help the people who are watching this show. Garvey was born in 1887. Can you give us a little bit of an idea about where he was born and what the environment was like?
Okay. He was born in 1887, as you know, August 17th in St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica. And he came from a family, his parents were from the Maroons. And most Jamaicans know that they were a fighting group. They were slave descendants, and they refused to be made slaves after the emancipation. And they fought really, really hard. and ran away and formed their own communities and so forth and so on. And from that, many people extended. Mr. Garvey's parents, they were small sharecroppers and farmers, but on a small scale, nothing like we saw during the time of slavery. Now, he grew up in a household where his father, I think, was way above his time. He had a huge library, so he was well read. He went to school, elementary school, and was provided with private lessons or tutors, as they would say in the old days, and became very knowledgeable about a lot of things reading from his father's library. His father was also a stonemason. That was really the trade, although they did participate in some sort of peasant farming, but like I said, on a small scale. He left school at the age of 14, which was not unusual in that time. But by that age, he had been apprenticed to a printer, a local printer. And he learned a trade at a very early age. By the time he was 18, he went into the big city, Kingston, which was the capital, and where there were more opportunities. And he worked again as a printer there and worked himself up. By the time he was 18, he was a manager, which was unheard of at that time in the printers union and so forth and so on. Was very widely read, got himself involved in political discourse and wanted to participate in the political life of Jamaica, and did for many years. And then he wasn't satisfied with that. He saw the problem with Black people all around the world, set out on travels. I think because we're among panelists of historians, you all know the story. But for those listening who are not so familiar, I hope they will learn something new about Marcus Garvey from this.
Thank you very much. Yes. Professor Lewis, as Ms. Jean was saying, he was a manager with a workforce which at one important time went out on strike.
Correct.
And famously, am I correct, Professor Lewis, in saying that Garvey didn't side with the managers, he sided with the workers, and that got him into trouble?
In a lot of trouble. He was fired, as a matter of fact.
So what did that mean, do you think, in terms of the history of Jamaica? That's rather unusual. Would you say, Professor Lewis, to side with the workers rather than managers if you're a manager yourself?
Yes, because the working class was discriminated against. Working class was largely Black. Managers, owners would be white. And if you're looking at your own self-interest, you would kowtow to management in order to move up. But throughout his life, Garvey had a deep commitment to justice, racial justice, to economic justice, and therefore his involvement with the printer strike at an early age gives us an idea of what his career, how his career would evolve, particularly in the sphere of racial justice.
Yeah. One of the important things about Garvey is that he was a great orator. He had a silver tongue, but he developed that over many, many years. He went to elocution lessons and he took part in elocution competitions, statewide competitions. I wonder, Jabulani, whether you think the oration of Garvey stood him in great stead in terms of his elevation as he progressed through life. What was the importance of him as an orator, do you think?
I've heard it said, they said Marcus Garvey could make you laugh and cry in the same sentence. You know, he was a master orator. And also he was what you would call, by his own admission, a master propagandist. So as a publisher, a printer, a journalist, his ability to communicate with his people is what put him above his other peers. You know, as you alluded to earlier, he took the side of the workers and of the Black working class. And he expressed their interests to the wider imperialist world. And he also interpreted that imperialist, racist world for them. So his communication skills were unmatched, and it would have to be obviously seen as one of his greatest assets, his ability to speak and to write and to publish and to communicate and reach people. You know, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. You know, these words and the actions that go along with it speak for themselves. And again, you know, his impact has been universal. So, you know, his success in doing all of this is unchallengeable.
Yeah, I wonder, thank you very much. I wonder, Stephen Golding, the degree to which Garvey was a kind of everyman and a Jamaican everyman. I mean, there's a very famous story. I wonder whether you think it's true that on one of these occasions that I mentioned, when he was appearing at an elocution competition, he was well used to coming first and winning the prize. But on one occasion, he was jeered and heckled, and he sued the heckler and won. So that speaks to this Jamaican idea about Jamaicans being the most litigious people on the planet. And Garvey was quite litigious, was he not?
Yeah, and when you speak about him being everyman, we also have to take into consideration the kind of things Garvey was exposed to in his career and from an early age. I mean, even learning the trade of printing and then traveling. You know, Garvey was in Central America. He was in London. He worked with a man known as Deuce Muhammad Ali, who himself was a journalist and who himself was an actor, you know, a Black Egyptian who, you know, this kind of exposure and influence on Garvey, I think very much helped mold the person he was, his style of oratory, his style of journalism. This was a traveled man who was not only well-read, but was connected to some key figures in the wider Pan-African movement, progressive men in their own right, who were doing great things at the time.
Now, it's true that in a good way, I preface that by saying in a good way, Jamaica is a country you leave. And I say that because oftentimes there's no much work and you have to go to find where the work is. And this is true of Garvey. When Garvey was a young man, 10,000 people a year were leaving Jamaica to go and find work. And often they would go to places like Panama and Costa Rica. Moriama, if that's the right pronunciation of your word, what did he learn from his travels in Costa Rica and Panama, would you say?
Yes, I believe through his travels in Costa Rica, Panama, and throughout Central, America and abroad, he began to understand that the conditions of not just Jamaican nationals, but conditions of Black people worldwide were similar, where they all, or we all, I should say, were experiencing the same, exploitation, subjugation. We were always being treated a certain type of way. And he began to discover that reason was not because of any innate inferiority, but because of our disorganization. And that began to become the central theme of all of his uplift work. He began to understand that our greatest enemy was not one another, was not, anybody else outside of ourselves. Because in saying that, we'd be conceding that those people were superior to us. But they weren't superior, they was just superior organizers. And we were in a position where we could organize as well as they, so that goes back to the confidence you were talking about, Mr. Garvey had, that allowed him to be that great orator, to be the great facilitator of these newspapers. He was coming up with these ideas. He was seeing himself as the leader, just like his father demonstrated when he was a young man, when he was consuming every book in the library and learning to, he even used to share with some of his friends at the time, the dictionary, and say, pick out a word that I don't know in this dictionary. And that's the kind of commitment, he had. He was an ordinary man, but he was an ordinary man with an extraordinary conviction. And because of that, as he traveled and began to see things, he decided he himself would come up with a solution. In fact, it was the famous question he asked, where's the Black man's army? Where's his navy? Where's his men of big affairs? Where's his king and kingdom? And he didn't see those things, so he decided at that point, it was time to start creating those institutions for ourselves.
Well, it should be said that he had this titanic certainty. Before we get to this titanic certainty, this great leader, let's try to paint a picture of the man. So, Miss Jean, this is a man who seemed to have a fondness for women whose names were Amy. Can you explain that?
Well, I'm sure it was coincidental, but his first wife indeed was Amy. And they were not married very, very long.
Amy Ashwood.
Amy Ashwood, yes. But she was involved in the early days, of the beginning of the UNIA. And he met her, as you mentioned, through one of these sessions where he would always be speaking, and so was she. And they connected, male and female, as you know. He left Jamaica and came abroad, and they communicated, but not as paramours then. But then she went to New York and reconnected with him after all his travels, and worked in the UNIA, and they got married. I don't think the marriage lasted very long, perhaps like 2 years or so. And then they were divorced, and Amy Jacques at that time was secretary in the UNIA, and they formed a union also.
But can we track back a little bit? Because didn't the two Amy's know each other? I mean,
yes, they knew. They were friends, as a matter of fact. It's
Mm-hmm.
been written that they were friends.
Wasn't Amy Jacques also at the wedding, at the first wedding of Amy Ashwood and Marcus?
Yes. In fact, I think she was in the wedding party, if I'm not mistaken.
Mention them all.
So, Professor Rupert Lewis, that difficulty of marrying one Amy and then marrying the other, how did that impact, you think, on Garvey's life?
Well, Garvey was very focused. If in his marriage there were going to be any obstacle to his political mission, then that obstacle would have to be removed.
Yes.
I mean, he's very clear-cut on that. But I'd like to inform our viewers that there are 3 Amy's in Marcus's life. There's Amy Ashwood, a brilliant woman, organizer, and co-founder of the UNIA, being there at the outset
at the beginning.
1914. There's Amy Jakes. Amy Ashwood went to Westwood High School. Amy Jakes went to Wolmer's, and certainly her work within the UNIA and her work after Garvey's death from 1940 to 1973 is legendary. There had been no philosopher opinions had she not done that work. But there is a third Amy. This Amy was not a wife. This Amy was a social worker in Jamaica, renowned woman in the 1930s, 40s, 50s women's movement, a woman by the name of Amy Bailey. And her memoir of Garvey in his latter days is extremely important. So women who were involved in struggle, these were the women that he linked and connected to. And Amy Jakes, I remember her saying that he was a mental man, that is to say, not the physical side. Obviously, the physical side is a part of any marriage, but the extraordinary dedication to struggle took a toll on the family itself. So I will end there so that others can participate.
Thank you for that. So let's get a sense of what this educating man who educated himself was doing and how he could live. Did he live an idle life, Jabulani Tafari? I mean, I know that he had this public persona where he wore Victorian military regalia, but at home, I understand he was very humble. He wore cardigans and slippers and ate cream crackers.
I like to call Marcus Garvey in this time the godfather of Black Lives Matter. And, you know, there's been a recent news item that some of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement in America have been enriching themselves or maybe misusing some of the funds generated by the movement in these in this 21st century. Well, Marcus Garvey obviously never enriched himself all the time. I mean, it's said that Garvey fainted while he was doing some of his public speaking on the street. His shoes reportedly had holes in it. So Garvey, with all of his great movement that he started, was never about self-enrichment. His wife, his children, who weren't rich, he didn't pass on a legacy of money, ill-gotten gains of, you know, of the struggle. So yes, he was a humble man who was totally committed to the struggle and made a lot of personal sacrifices. And as with all real activists, you know, his family also suffered to some degree because of his commitment to the people. So of this again, there can be no question and no dispute. He was for real.
And thank you. And Stephen Golding, to what degree was Marcus Garvey lucky? So in 1917, he went to New York, which was an unseasonably warm spring that year, and it was the beginning of the street orators. But he'd gone on the understanding that he'd sent a letter to Booker T. Washington, who before Garvey was probably the most famous black man on the planet, bar none. And Washington must have got lots of these letters from fans. Garvey said, well, I'm becoming to the USA. And Booker T. Washington said words to the effect of, well, if you're in the area, do drop by. By the time Garvey was able to drop by, Booker T. Washington was dead. But he went to America and he was introduced to the American population in Harlem in 1917. Stephen Golding, what was the position of Harlem in terms of Caribbean people, and what kind of reception did he receive when he first landed in America?
What he encountered was the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, which he became very much a big part of. We're talking about the Great Migration, you know, African Americans moving up from the South, also coming in from the Caribbean, Harlem becoming this black mecca and this center of black activity that resonated around the world, you know, jazz music, the oratory, the poetry, the dance, the nightlife. Garvey, when he arrived in Harlem also, remember, he was very much introduced to the public on a platform that was already being operated by a man in Harlem they called the Black Socrates, Hubert Harrison, who for a time was kind of a mentor to Garvey. Maybe later in his life saw him as a rival. Harrison also had a very close relationship to Amy Ashwood, perhaps too close in Garvey's mind. And if you follow the court records, but Hubert Harrison was a large figure in Harlem. He was also from the Caribbean, coming from the U.S. Virgin Islands. You know, dabbled in workers' rights, labor unions, you know, socialism. He had a great influence in terms of the power of the soapbox oratory. And I think Garvey learned a lot from him, mastered the craft and took it to a next level. And so it was from the energies in Harlem at that time, from the migrations, the melting pot it created, and the different avenues that others had already created, that Garvey was able to galvanize and propel the UNIA to what it became. Remember, he had founded it 3 years earlier, but it had not reached what he envisioned until he was able to plug into that energy in Harlem and to export it around the world from that powerful black mecca.
Absolutely, thank you very much for that. Mariama, at the time when Garvey arrived, 1/5 of the people in Harlem had traveled from the South. 3/5 were born in and around there. 1/5 of the people in Harlem at that time were from the Caribbean. So he had a kind of ready-made audience. It was said also that when any Caribbean person got 10 cents above poverty, they would start a business. So he was talking to people who had an entrepreneurial spirit, wasn't he?
Yes, absolutely. Well, yes, not only entrepreneurial, but the average Caribbean immigrant in the U.S. were actually more educated than the average Black Americans at the time. But yes, Mr. Garvey was known to practice what he would later call rigid thrift in order to accomplish his means. As he began traveling and speaking, he just lived in a hallway of an apartment, not a room for rent, but a hall for rent. And so he was, very frugal, and he saved up his resources. He would sometimes stay at YMCAs when he would visit a town to speak and travel. And he began to attract an audience and also get a feel for the United States, whose struggle was a little different from the struggle in Jamaica. And the discrimination was a little, it was very clear to those in the U.S. that it was racial and not a class struggle so much. And that, regardless of how much money you made and how great an education you had, you, quote unquote, air quotes, knew your place in America if you were Black. So Blacks in America had a certain understanding. It was ideal to his program. And I believe also at the time, there were a number of leaders who thought themselves radical, but whose ideas weren't really radical by comparison at the time. Mr. Garvey came on the scene. You'll know about the Great Race Riot in East St. Louis, when there was a riot that broke out and hundreds of Blacks were massacred, oftentimes in front of National Guards, while babies were thrown into burning buildings. Mr. Garvey had one approach. Other people, NAACP and others, they would do silent marches. They would want to write, letters, etc. But Mr. Garvey saw it as an opportunity to inform the community of how we can better organize ourselves to defend ourselves and how we can protect our own community through superior organization. That our solution wasn't to ask the people who did this to fix the problem, but to get us to fix the problem ourselves. And his solution was considered far more manly, far less reliant upon others and more reliant upon ourselves to fix things. So as he began to develop the UNIA in the United States, you begin to see many people who gravitate to him who were more nationalistic minded, those who understood that, we were the equal to any other.
Well, Du Bois had visited Jamaica around about 1912. And Garvey had a debate with him concerning the nature of the race question in Jamaica and the difference with the United States. Garvey grew up with respect for the work of Du Bois as a historian. However, in the politics of the United States in the 1920s, the NAACP, which was white founded, was an organization that had a different ideology, a different set of practices than the ideology and practices of the UNIA. And there developed a bitter conflict as the Garvey movement grew as a mass movement. It exposed the more elitist and middle strata character of the NAACP and other organizations. So what I still find it disturbing is the ethnic characterization that Du Bois made of Garvey as this is that ugly man.
Short, fat, black
I
man.
still find that really offensive. However, I take heart that later on, Du Bois found his way to Nkrumah's Ghana. And was able to recognize the importance of the Pan-African ideal which Garvey had in the 1920s. So I think a rift was healed by the 1940s, and certainly Amy Jacks and Du Bois collaborated on the Atlantic Charter in the 1940s with respect to the inclusion of Blacks in the post-World War II years. But then the communists, the American Communist Party, and more importantly, the Communist International out of Moscow, saw Garvey as a rival. And there was a huge campaign against him by the Communist International. Garvey, of course, had a very clear view of Black internationalism and Pan-Africanism, and a foundation which was based on the historical development of our people. And therefore, whilst there could be solidarity with other groups and so on, Garvey was very clear that Black people had to develop their own mechanisms. So there was considerable competition between the communists and the Garveyites. Claude McKay is emblematic of that tension, because for a time, Claude McKay was in the communist ranks, went to Russia, later became disillusioned, as it were. So that's part of it. Now,
explain to readers and listeners, Claude McKay, famous Jamaican poet, part of the Harlem Renaissance, but also courted by the communists, and the author of the famous poem, If We Must Die.
Yeah, that If We Must Die connects to the discussion Mariama was making about the riots, because I think McKay wrote that in 1919. And again, that is still something that's relevant to the Buffalo killings, that if we must die, let it not be like us. But I wanted to insert the importance of the World War, 1914, 1918. Over 2 million Black people were recruited as soldiers in France, United States. The British recruited West Indian soldiers. And when these people returned, having laid down their lives, having been wounded in the battlefields of Europe, they returned to racism. And Garvey looked at them and asked, if you're prepared to die for the white man, you must put your lives in the service of yourself and your own people. And those ex-soldiers were very important through the United States in the movement of the armed wing of the Garvey movement. And they were very active in rebellions and riots in the Caribbean, now documented by Robert Hill in the Caribbean volumes of the excellent Marcus Garvey and UNIA papers.
Yes, President Woodrow Wilson brought America into the First World War, quote, to make the world safe for democracy.
For democracy.
But Marcus Garvey was saying, very well, make the world safe for democracy, but let's start with Georgia and make Georgia safe for the Black man first.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please do.
And Woodrow Wilson was also hosting the Ku Klux Klan, which was at its height from the movie, the first blockbuster movie in American history, Birth of a Nation. And the Ku Klux Klan was in ascendancy throughout America. And that was the climate in which these Black soldiers were returning from this world war to face the Red Summer of 1919, like 76 Black people lynched all across America, the East St. Louis riots. You had Rosewood in Florida, you had Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, Black communities being bombed and all of this kind of stuff. This was the climate in which now the Harlem Renaissance was taking place in the 20s, and the UNIA was holding now international conventions at Madison Square Garden in New York. And, you know, it was like a perfect storm of activities happening, threatening us as African people and providing cannon fodder for the growth of the UNIA, because our people, Black people, saw the need for a Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was the most beloved Black man in the 1920s by us, and he was the most hated black man by the white establishment, English, French, Belgian, I mean, you name it. So, Woodrow Wilson and the Ku Klux Klan, go research that people, the Klan in the 1920s and their impact on the Garveyites.
It's true. It's important to say that Woodrow Wilson had a screening of that film in the White House.
In the White House.
In the White House.
And he said, well, most important, he said, it was like history written in lightning. And if only it wasn't true. But turning to you, Ms. Jean, what impact did all of this have, do you think, on the personal life of Marcus Garvey? When I think about Marcus Garvey, sometimes I think about all of the forces rained against him, as Kabulani was referring to, and I wondered how he got out of bed in the morning. But also I wondered about the impact of all that on his family. What would you say was the impact of Garvey's activism on his family, and also the very fact that there's so many enemies rained against him?
Well, that came before he started a family with Amy Jacques. You must remember this was in the 20s, what was going on in Harlem. But like most people wonder ourselves, if you live in that environment, how do you get up every morning and still be thinking about the uplift of your race? That did not stop him, enemies and all. It's been said that he collaborated with the Ku Klux Klan and the communists. He had to speak to them. Garvey spoke to everyone who impacted the lives of Black people. And not to say that this was a friendly thing, but everybody knows he went to the Ku Klux Klan and he said, if you kill my people, we will kill you back. They were not about to take it sitting down.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he had a lot, to borrow a term, chutzpah in those days.
Yep.
Yeah, he was a foreign man.
Yep.
Can we turn
he didn't kowtow to anyone.
Absolutely.
Not the communists, not the Ku Klux Klan. And there were people also inside the organization, as you know, that he had to be leery of.
As saboteurs.
He was a very brave Jamaican.
Very brave.
Mariami and Stephen Golding, can we turn to the pivotal moment of the Black Star Line, the shipping line? Can I ask you both to talk to its importance, both in terms of his success and in terms of his defeat? Can we start with you?
Yes. Well, I'm older, so I guess I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Black Star Line was the point at which most people begin to understand that Mr. Garvey wasn't just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And that's the point at which his enemies were forced to take notice of him
seriously
and begin to really respond.
Before we get into that, Maria, before we get in, can you explain to people who aren't familiar with the Black Star Line what it was?
Yeah, the Black Star Line, Mr. Garvey had, as may have been mentioned a little earlier, he worked on a farm as a young man with his mother and uncle. He was familiar with, he used to sell bananas. He was familiar with timekeeping, when he was in Central America. And he was familiar with the United Fruit Company and, others at the time. He understood commerce and trade and business and how much money they were making off of the backs of the laborers and how much, people weren't getting, people of African descent weren't getting back. So Mr. Garvey came up with an idea for us to have our own ships. At the time, there was the White Star Line, the Green Star Line.
Titanic.
Yeah, exactly. The Titanic was part of that White Star Line. So there were other, races and nationalities who were mostly after World War I, but many of the ships were kind of in surplus. So many people were boasting about having their own transportation system. So naturally, if you want to build an industry of commerce, you're going to have to transport goods and services and people. So Mr. Garvey came up with the idea for forming a Black Star shipping line. And he wanted to eventually develop a fleet of ocean-going vessels, et cetera, and have the same people who raise money for the U.S. War bonds and for raising money for everything else, to raise money, Black people to raise money for themselves, to have a shipping line that we can work on, our workers can serve, et cetera, and we can benefit from. So the Black Star shipping line was the first of a major set of, well, I wouldn't say it's the first, but it was one of the major industrial enterprises that Mr. Garvey had pioneered amongst his race. And it was the one that probably attracted most attention from a lot of people Ms. Garvey was already persecuted before that, but
Mariam, let's even continue that line of thought.
Sure.
Because in a way, it became a kind of tool for propaganda, didn't it, Stephen Golding? But also, did it in some way lead to his downfall?
First of all, let me just put something in context. I mean, because as much as it was a phenomenal feat, we're talking about after a world war, and so this was commonplace in you know what we would term today multinational business. You know, there were a lot of ships that had been constructed using the war, and then you know they were sold after. You had a number of shipping lines that came up and went down. It wasn't just the Black Star Line, right? So that was the context of the time. Also, we have to remember that, you know, even reflecting on what you all said about Woodrow Wilson and World War I, this opened up a large opportunity for Garvey and the organization. Remember, the League of Nations was formed because of World War I. And it is the first time now that Garvey seizes the opportunity to petition on the international stage for the rights of Black people, for the human rights of Black people, and for things such as repatriation to Africa and so forth. And so the Black Star Line really came in as a component of that. You know, what is the best form of big business for us to jump into that will also complement our aims and objectives. But some of the challenges Garvey had when you talk about, you know, the difference between running it straight as a business, but also as a propaganda machine for the movement was, for example, finding qualified Black captains. At the time, he could only find one with a license, a Bahamian who at the time was working out of a port in Nigeria, but who had been licensed by the British, had been in the British Royal Navy. And this is Captain Joshua Cockburn, right? And who single-handedly, I could say, began the downfall of the Black Star Line, whether in his shady dealings, whether in him trying to make a buck on every deal, whether in, you know, from him giving erroneous information to Garvey. I mean, a lot of people don't know that this man became a major real estate mogul in New York after his foray with the Black Star Line. And it left Garvey scrambling now to find replacements. At one time, even having to use a white captain, who was the captain that brought him to the Caribbean on that Black Star Line tour, before he finally met Captain Hugh Mulzac, who incidentally I knew his daughter very well, Una Mulzac from Liberation Bookstore, who was the next Black captain with a license. So we're talking about Black people going into industry at the time, but we also talking about the real social challenges in a prejudiced society, as well as the challenges of qualification, because Black people were kept out of these industries for so long.
Very important point, but let me be the devil's advocate here, Professor Lewis. To what degree was Garvey naive? I mean, there's ships that were bought, they weren't seaworthy. A lot of money was lost on those ships. To what degree was the downfall down to the fact that he said, in his defense, that he gave everybody a chance to benefit from the Black Star Line, and everybody of importance within the UNIA fleeced the Black Star Line? But was Garvey naive?
Well, I think this is where the Bureau of Investigation comes in. J. Edgar
Hoover.
If you don't understand the way in which the Black Star Line was the people deployed agents who worked for the Bureau of Investigation in order for and ensure that bad decisions were made, because Garvey was not a maritime expert. You have to rely on others for that discipline. To the extent that, however, the people you are relying on
are
involved with the Bureau of Investigation, then you get a very complicated situation whereby the Bureau of Investigation and the US people benefit from the view that this was all Garvey's fault, where we know that they are stoking the fire to try and get that important project, which was a galvanizing factor. So you could say that, yes, a little more discriminating on Garvey's part, but he was not involved in the day-to-day running of the project.
To what degree, though, Jabulani, was the difficulty of obtaining land in Liberia problematic for the Garvey movement? Can we explain about what Garvey was trying to do in Liberia?
It turned out that way. Right now, the Emperor Haile Selassie had offered land to Garvey in Ethiopia, and he ended up now trying to get land in Liberia instead. And Firestone and the French and the British and all of these people put pressure on the president of Liberia to block that whole Back to Africa movement. I mean, they sent a ship with engineers and supplies, which was confiscated. They lost a lot of equipment and money and never made that beachhead, which was to have started now setting up independent African cities in Africa for the UNIA. So tactically, it was a mistake. It ended up being now trying to go to this colonial place under colonial control. So although it was an ambitious and a very praiseworthy venture, again, just like with the Black Star Line, you know, certain things are out of your control. And, you know, it ended up now not being successful, but through no fault of Garvey's.
But Colin, may I just jump in here and say, prior to getting to that point, that it was not by accident that all these colonial powers, the British, the French, the Dutch, when Marcus Garvey wanted to go to Liberia, we have to put that again in context. Remember the automobile industry now. The cars were getting to that point where they needed tires. And where were the rubber plantations?
Yep.
They were in Liberia. So Marcus Garvey put together his crew with the engineers and so forth. They were going there to clear those lands so that they could reap the rubber, and they would in turn supply the auto industry with tires, with the rubber, so they could make tires and so forth and so on. The rest is history. We know that they were stopped from doing that, and Firestone went in and they confiscated all the earth moving equipment and everything that were sent. Then of course, here's the propaganda. Marcus Garvey is gonna do this Back to Africa thing. He's gonna take Americans back to Africa. Those ships were made to do trade, the triangular trade between the Caribbean, the Americas, and the continent of Africa. And for those with skills who wanted to go and help to rebuild the African nation. So that was how this misnomer came about. You know, the propaganda piece, he's taking people back, the Back to Africa movement. There was not that in mind that we were going to go en masse to the continent.
Yeah, good point.
I think we also need to put in context of, you know, the networks Garvey was operating. Yes, the Ethiopian delegation did come to Harlem in 1919. They met with the UNIA. There were discussions. But at the time, Rastafari was not yet the crown prince.
Right.
But he was a very progressive person, and he offered an invitation for skilled Black people to come and help
build the country.
At the same time, there was a key figure in Liberia who was chief of their court, Supreme Court at the time, Judge J.J. Dosset, who was very close to the Garvey movement. And in fact, it was his interactions with Garvey, that led to Gabriel Johnson being elected potentate at the first international convention. And so the Liberian connection expanded. Also remember that Liberia was seeking a loan from the US government of some $5 million US, that Garvey felt the UNIA in its strength could provide.
Could
so
provide.
It was a political and economic move. Also remember, Liberia is on the west coast of Africa in terms of a beachhead in Africa. To establish one, it is easier than talking about the highlands of Ethiopia. Right?
Correct.
So I don't think it was a choice of one or the other. It is just what was more practical and what the network could execute at that time. Of course, J.J. Dawson's death caused a big blow to that. You know, Gabriel Johnson's defection, another big blow. And there were even UNIA officers like one of the Poston brothers who died at sea coming back from Liberia. So, I mean, the move, if you look at it from an intellectual point of view, from a planning point of view, it was well planned. It was a good plan. But then we were faced with a number of catastrophes back to back that affected it. Not to mention W.E.B. Du Bois's intervention on behalf of the U.S. government.
I'm glad you brought in Du Bois there, because Professor Lewis,
good point.
Can it be said, do you think it's possibly that they could have succeeded if they had joined forces? The problem with Garvey and Du Bois is that they never actually met, apart from one time in Cincinnati in the mid-20s, in a famous moment at a hotel.
The lizard and the lion.
They're at the same hotel. Garvey is coming down to the foyer in a lift, and at the ground floor is Du Bois. The lift doors open. They see each other. Du Bois goes into the lift. Garvey goes out of the lift. Their nostrils flare. And the next day in the Cincinnati News, the headline was, "Garvey and Du Bois meet. No blood is shed."
But Colin, you got to tell the story in the right context, you know. It wasn't just Garvey in the lift. Garvey was surrounded by a cadre of Black Cross nurses. There were there was a legionnaire with him. I mean, he stepped out of that lift with a party. And this also explains from Garvey's perspective why he claims that he didn't realize it was Du Bois at first or until it was too late. You know, because
Stephen, good point. But but the bigger point is that these are two powerful men who didn't combine, and that could have been a great success had they combined. Professor Lewis, yes or no?
Yeah, well, the essential issue is that you have to the differences of the perspectives between Du Bois and Garvey. Those differences had widened in the 20s. You could say, in theory, if they had combined, it could have made a formidable team. What Du Bois brings to the table is his intellect. But the intellect was an intellect that was thinking along lines of integration, lines of cooperation with white liberals.
Assimilation.
Assimilation. Garvey's perspective from the outset had been Pan-African.
But if I may,
shifts to that. So I don't think that politically the forces that they represented would have seen eye to eye.
Okay, good point.
I agree with you, Dr. Lewis. And the other point that is so cogent here is also that Du Bois had this notion about the talented 10 and the gradation of color, the gradation of color in between.
Absolutely.
Good point, Ms. Jean. But Mariama, can we revisit this moment of the Garvey must go campaign, the campaign to get rid of Garvey? To what degree did his meeting with the Ku Klux Klan lead to that campaign? And why was it so pivotal in the minds of people who despised the Ku Klux Klan that Garvey met with the Ku Klux Klan?
Yeah, well, it was, I think, an opportunistic moment for those who were, I would say, founders of the early 20th century Me Too movement. Because every time a white man said he was a notorious agitator and that he used to be ran out of the country, what do y'all think? A lot of these Negroes said, "Me too, boss." And these Me Too boss people, like Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois and others, they were essentially jealous haters of Garvey. So they were trying to find any opportunity they could to sabotage him, his propaganda. Dr. Boyce used to go around talking about Garvey wanted to kill all white people. The ships of the Black Star Line were so raggedy that you'll fall to your death on them, and all these kinds of ridiculous comments. When right after Mr. Garvey's ships were taken, he would go and write to the Secretary of State begging for one of the ships that he claimed was so raggedy, and later had to print a retraction. But anyway, there was a lot of opposition, and even though Mr. Garvey said the source of his success was opposition, oppose him and he'll fight the more, it came to a point when I guess the people didn't understand why Mr. Garvey needed to disarm the Klan when they invited him to be interviewed when he was in the South, and he decided to oblige and kind of do a follow-up interview with them to see what their intentions were, as well as his aims and objects. He thought it was, which was a stroke of genius to meet them head on, because some of his organizers, like Malcolm X's father, later and others, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s, grandmother, etc. These people were killed organizing on behalf of the UNIA. So some of the Liberty Halls were, actually literally bombed. And so when you have this opposition group and you have your uniform ranks or your quote unquote paramilitary group is prepared to defend your people, at some point you two have to meet. Two generals got to come together and make a decision. But the optics of it were exploited by people who were
misrepresented
the civil rights movement, because the Klan had historically been, so depicted as an evil, want to exterminate the Black race kind of group, and so just to meet with them was like meeting with Satan, incarnate. And so people started saying, "Oh, he met with them because he's trying to join them and use them to run blacks out the country," and this kind of crazy nonsense that didn't exist, which was insane to even suggest. But many of the opportunists of that day were doing that, and this is again the opposition amongst Black people at that time. Only a certain portion of Black people, I should say, most were in favor of Garvey, but a small portion of civil rights leaders and others, was trying to sabotage the Black Star Line ships, like someone mentioned earlier, even throwing metal objects in the ship's engines. Some of the people who took jobs had the liberty to sabotage it, as well as Mr. Garvey getting shot when he first put the Black Star Line together. He got stoned when he was in Detroit. He was getting attacked every which way, thrown in prison for ridiculous reasons.
Let's pause there, because I think we're drawing to an end, and I want to visit this important moment in his life when he gets sent to jail, to the Atlanta Penitentiary for mail fraud. That's the charge. I'm going to ask all of you, as a kind of final summation, really. A, was he guilty? And B, should he be rehabilitated in some way? Should he be brought back and people made to be clearly understood that he was innocent? Let's start with Ms. Jean.
Of course, he was not guilty. We all know the evidence came out. He was convicted on a charge where the main person that witness against him produced an envelope that was open that claimed he didn't know, he couldn't remember what was in the envelope. Can you
empty
imagine?
Envelope.
Yeah, can you imagine being convicted on evidence like an empty envelope?
Yeah. So the point, Professor Lewis, this was a charge of mail fraud, and the idea, I suppose, was that Garvey was accused of selling shares in ships that hadn't yet been bought.
Right.
Correct? To what degree, though, did he undermine his own defense by sacking his lawyer?
Yes, I think that it's clear that he needed to have legal representation.
Legal representation.
Sack your lawyer, you need to have another lawyer replacing your lawyer, because technically there are issues which, if you're not a lawyer, it's going to be difficult for you to handle in a court of law. So I think that was an error on his part.
But what happened whilst he was in prison, Jabulani? What happened in terms of the movement, would you say?
Well, that was the start of the fragmentation of the movement while he was in prison. While the cat's away, the rats will play. So all kind of people, opportunists, started doing their thing. And I mean, You know, I always say Garvey was the first Jamaican political deportee, because even though a lot of the jury who convicted him agreed after the fact that he was falsely accused and falsely imprisoned and wanted his sentence to be commuted. You know, it was commuted by Calvin Coolidge, but even until this day, you know, we want an exoneration, and an exoneration differently from a pardon. Pardon means we are forgiving you for doing a wrong. Exoneration is of the notion that we are admitting that you were falsely accused, and he was falsely accused. And that's the point we want to get across to the world today. Garvey was falsely accused.
But even from jail, he penned a very famous letter to his followers, didn't he, Mariama?
Yes, he did.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what was that?
He had well, this is popularly known as the "Look for Me in a Whirlwind" message. But yes, Mr. Garvey at that moment realized that his enemies had, succeeded in railroading him into prison on a charge that he did not and could not have possibly committed. And I also reject the idea that representing himself was a bad idea, but because he did actually have a Harvard-trained attorney who asked him to cop a plea to a charge that he was innocent of. So imagine, you get a charge with jaywalking when you're in Africa, and someone tells you to cop a plea to it, and he's a Harvard-trained attorney. Well, he obviously working with the state, which we found out later was true, as well as the second lawyer, who was a Harvard-trained attorney, who also told him to cop a plea to something he was clearly easily not guilty of, and it took a whole lot of sabotaging and lying and all kinds of things by the state, bringing in FBI agents without informing the jury of who they were and informants, etc. All kinds of, we go over the whole appeal easily. But there were a lot of things done to jeopardize the case, so that Mr. Garvey, even though he did ultimately win the case, the jury was kind of forced to find him guilty of something, or they will be threatened to go back over the case again. So they chose the lightest thing they could find. But Garvey actually did a great job of representing himself, and he did have the assistance of Henry Lincoln Johnson, who was an attorney representing the other three, who was assisting him every step of the way. So I actually think that was a good idea. But yeah, but Mr. Garvey's incarceration with the Whirlwind message, he did a lot to inspire future generations. But he also wrote a lot in prison. African fundamentalism, which became the official creed of the UNIAACL, was written while he was there, as well as Tragedy of White Injustice and a number of other poems and famous writings.
Stephen Golding, can we just turn to this pivotal moment then after his death? Garvey died in 1940. Was it a brilliant move on the part of Siega and other people to bring Garvey back to forge a new identity for Jamaica after independence? Garvey becomes the first national hero. How important was that moment, would you say? Stephen Golding.
Very important for us. We're proud that he's our first national hero. Pivotal moment, I suppose, for Mr. Siega and his own political career. Garvey had refused to return to Jamaica. He had sort of gone into this self-imposed exile after his experience coming back here after his prison term in the United States. His second wife had left him in London and returned with the children, unknown to him. He returned from a convention to find out that had happened. And so, those last years of his life certainly weren't the happiest. And as I understand it, he was reacquainted with Amy Ashwood, who herself was also involved in getting his body released to be returned to Jamaica. But certainly him becoming our first national hero was a great moment for us as a nation. National Heroes Park was really established with the return of his body and the building of his shrine there. And following that, we added 6 more national heroes to the roster, and maybe need to add some more now. But I think it was, in the fact that it came in the 60s and on the cusp of the Black Power movement, this resurgence of talking about Garvey, of recognizing him after 2 decades after his death, which he died in a self-imposed exile. It certainly was a pivotal move in terms of placing Garvey in the position that we find him today, being celebrated as a Pan-Africanist, as a Jamaican, as a national hero, and as a great man.
And
it was a very shrewd political move on Seaga's part. They were trying to appease the black people of Jamaica, because right now Garvey has been given a bad name from that time until this time by the ruling classes in Jamaica. And because of Rastafari championing Garvey's good name, and because of black people, they brought back Garvey and they did all of that. And, you know, that is the context I would put it in.
And we're all here to champion. I'm going to finish with Rupert Lewis and Jean Garvey. Both of you, could you answer this point? Do you think he will ever be exonerated in America? And what will it mean to you and to the nation? I'll start with Professor Lewis.
For dealing with the exoneration, when Garvey was deported from the United States, he had a vibrant political and cultural career in Jamaica, and the Caribbean and Canada. This area of his life tends to be neglected. It is of inestimable value because in this period, he develops a range of public policy initiatives on land, on education, on housing, on cultural institutions. He writes 3 plays at Edelweiss Park. He is a cultural entrepreneur. There are things that he does, and he maintains. There are 2 international conventions that are held in Jamaica in 1929, 1934. So exoneration for me is an incentive for more people to understand what Garvey means. Opens up the thing because he's already exonerated in the minds of millions of people.
Thank you. And finally, Jean Garvey, do you share what Professor Lewis is saying?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I certainly do share that. And there's quite a bit after his return that people are unfamiliar with. And Dr. Lewis just explained all the stuff in education. He did go back into politics when he went to Jamaica. But obviously, you know, there were times when things were not going as well as he thought, and he went back to England and established in England. He moved the headquarters to England at that time. And just to correct a little bit about him not coming back to Jamaica. Yes, he was there. By now he had 2 sons and they were all living there together. And his older son, my husband, developed arthritis in one knee. And the doctor told them, unless you move to a warmer climate, this is not going to go away. So with his concentration on running the UNIA from there and not, you know, people in that capacity, the families do suffer. Mm-hmm. The running of the organization was more important in his mind. So Mrs. Garvey took her sons and moved back to Jamaica, where the climate was more conducive to the health care of her eldest son. And thank God she did. He lived until he was 90. I don't think he would have lived that long had he stayed in England. Absolutely. Because the conditions there in the 30s, without central heating in the homes and living in a damp environment, would have been detrimental to the health of his son.
Well, it's clear that Garvey lives in the hearts of all of us today. And it was often said that if only Garvey did one small thing, Garvey sold the black man and woman to themselves. Yep. He said way before Barack Obama, yes, you can. And
that's right. That's right.
To be honored. It could be argued that the civil rights movement did not begin in the 60s. The civil rights movement began in the 20s during Garvey's heyday. To what degree did Garvey sow the seeds to the civil rights movement? Let's go around the table. Moriama.
Yes, Mr. Garvey's movement sowed the seeds for every other movement that followed it. Mr. Garvey's ability to organize millions of people, not just in America, but worldwide, certainly shaped every leader that came after him. There's very few that can, honestly say they had no impact. Garvey wasn't. He was an activist, not an act as if. And he was one who organized people on a mass scale like had never been seen before, as well as the Declaration of Rights of Negro Peoples of the World was an important document. We didn't really discuss in the National Convention, but it helped shape a demand that we had for a certain expectation of rights for African people all over the world. But certainly, people like Dr. King, like Adam Clayton Powell Jr., like, Dr. King Jr., but as well as many other leaders, even Charles Hamilton Houston, who invited Mr. Garvey to the Harvard Club when he was in college, and who praised Mr. Garvey regularly, who was also orchestrator of the NAACP's campaign, Brown versus Board of Education, but as well as other people, even like Kenneth Clark, who was famous for the black doll, white doll baby. His parents were in the UNIAACL. Let many future leaders, the governor of New York at one time, was named David Pass, I forgot his name, but anyway, as well as certain other Congress people, Shirley Chisholm, others were born as Garvey Cubs and impacted by the Garvey movement. That's why King came to Jamaica and later read Mr. Garvey's tombstone. But I know you want to share others.
But it wasn't just the people like the people who become famous for the civil rights movement, but also people like Malcolm X, Stephen Golden.
Malcolm X whole family.
That is Malcolm X's father held office
mother,
in the UNIA, and his mother as
and
well.
his uncles in Canada.
In Canada and all over, yes.
Elijah
and
Muhammad
they
was
actually modeled their organization off of the UNIA.
We're speaking about the civil rights movement, but also very important as a Pan-Africanist. Would you say Stephen Golden and Rupert Lewis?
Well, I would say the Pan-African impact of Garvey on Kwame and Nkrumah is highly significant. And Nkrumah paid tribute to Garvey by developing the Black Star Line shipping line in Ghana. And Azikwe in Nigeria, one of the leaders of Nigeria, and there are many others on the continent. But one has to focus again, not only on the leaders, but on the grassroots activists involved in the civil rights, the decolonization movements, the nationalist movements throughout the Caribbean, all the islands in the Caribbean. The Garveyites played an important role in the labor movement of the 1930s. So leaders, and more importantly, grassroots activists.
And in South Africa too, because from the ANC.
The ANC, absolutely.
From the 20s and 30s, patterned its whole thing on the UNIA. So, I mean, again, Garvey's impact has been global, from Africa to the Americas to the Caribbean to 11 million members all over the world. Marcus Mosiah Garvey, up you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will.
Even Mao said that he was influenced by Marcus Garvey. Think back about that.
And what's his name?
Ho Chi Minh.
Ho Chi Minh. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And let's have a final word. Let's have a final word from Stephen Golding on this point about
about
the legacy of Marcus Garvey.
Stephen, wait up.
I think Stephen's frozen.
Well, while we wait for him to be unfrozen, let me just say that we didn't go into it a lot. I know there is so much to be said about, but one of the things that we have to remember, the 1920 convention at Madison Square Garden, where we had so many people, the result of that still exists today. The Declaration of the Rights of the Negro People of the World. That was done. Capitalization of the word Negro. People always wrote it with a small n. Today, it's written with a capital N.
Yeah, but they're afraid of that word still now.
They're still afraid of it, yes. The teaching of Black history in schools. The end of lynching. Of course, we have different forms of lynching today, as we will. The establishment of the red, black, and green flag. People say it's the They call it all kinds of stuff without giving credit to the UNIA to establish that flag.
Yes.
As well as the adoption of the Universal Ethiopian Anthem as the anthem for the UNIA, and the international holiday for Black people, August 31st. We don't hear too much about that.
You know, Auntie Jean,
all of these came from the convention of 1920. And let's look at today. Where are our own ships? Where are our navies? This was done way back when, more than 100 years ago. Where are we today in this world?
Let me just add to that, that August 31st has been endorsed by the UN now as the International Day for people of African descent. So it hasn't been forgotten. It has, that just happened last year, I believe. I wanted to make a civil rights movement.
You're freeze up, Stephen.
Am I back?
You're unfrozen.
I'm unfrozen now?
Yes. Go, Stephen, go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the civil rights movement. Garvey really taught Black people in America how to create political lobby, right? We spoke about his meeting with the Ku Klux Klan. We spoke about even the fact that he was able to petition for his own pardon in the terms of a commutation. Don't forget, in 1924, he launched the Universal Negro Political Union. And Garvey was able to lobby the US government on various occasions, even to get himself back into the country when the FBI, the Bureau of Investigation, tried to keep him out in 21. So people don't understand why he met with the Ku Klux Klan. He met with the Ku Klux Klan not only because they were clashing with the UNIA in the South, and that had to stop, but also because the Ku Klux Klan had a number of political persons in the US Congress in positions of power.
They were the most powerful organization in America.
Garvey was able to position himself and to lobby for Black people, lobby for himself when he was in prison. Before Rosa Parks, there was Ida B. Wells, who refused to give up her seat. And Ida B. Wells was a strong supporter of the Garvey movement and very much a mentor to Garvey when he used to go out to Chicago. And so I think, you know, in his whole experience, he learned to galvanize the political power of Black people as a lobby group in Washington and to effect change, political change at that level before Malcolm and before Martin.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to end there. So I think we're all in agreement. This is a great man, and he's in our hearts still today and will be in our children's hearts and our grandchildren's hearts, I hope. So I want to say thank you to Stephen Golding, to Mariama D. Kamau, to Professor Rupert Lewis, to Ras Jabulani Tafari, and also, last but not least, of course, to Jean Garvey. Thank you for watching, and as Ras Jabulani Tafari has said several times, up you mighty race, you can accomplish
what you will. The legacy lives on.
Right one on. God, one aim, one destiny.
Look, 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 look.
As children, we learn the true meaning of being a hero. Being a hero requires great sacrifice for others, not just ourselves. We learned about the heroes of Jamaica's past and how much of themselves and their lives they had to give in building a nation we should be proud to call home. They believed in a Jamaica that was more than just a country, more than just an island, more than land surrounded by water. They believed in a dream of a free nation of people, a nation built on the foundation of their sacrifices, a nation of many people working as one, a nation that would continue to produce legends and nation builders that serve towards that vision. As children, we were also taught the National Pledge, a solemn promise, an undertaking. I would like to believe Sir Hugh Sherlock, while writing this pledge, understood the vision and dreams of our heroes. It's clear being a hero is too much to ever ask any one citizen. Luckily, the pledge does not require heroics of any of us. It merely asks that we honor our heroes by striving to advance our nation and ultimately inspire the world, like they and many Jamaicans have done.
it's important we remember those words. These words. Before God and all mankind, I pledge love and loyalty of my heart, the wisdom and courage of my mind, the strength and vigor of my body in service of my fellow citizens. I promise to stand up for justice, brotherhood, and peace, to work diligently and creatively, to think generously and honestly, so that Jamaica may, under God, increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity, and play her part in advancing the welfare of the whole human race. If you are like me, a Jamaican born and raised on this land, maybe you will remember saying those words, singing that song in a classroom or some general assembly. If so, like me, you made a pledge. Somehow it seems like many of us have forgotten that. The crime and violence, the indiscipline and short-sightedness, the corruption, the lack of respect for our beautiful lands we are blessed with, and the waters that surround and nurtures us. We have to do better. Let us honor our heroes so that they would not have sacrificed so much in vain. I hope this video can make a difference to even one soul. If so, it would all be worth it. If you feel the way I do, share it. May my voice become yours. Thanks for watching.
Wow, what a presentation. What a presentation. The amount of knowledge I've just gained. Oh my, I feel so filled right now. The journey continues. He didn't want special treatment. He just wanted equal rights for his people. And on this day, as we celebrate his life, that is what we still strive for, is equal rights and justice for our people. Without apology, we celebrate Marcus Garvey.
None is crying out for justice. Everyone is crying out for peace. Yeah. None is crying out for justice. 'Cause I don't want no peace. I need equal rights and justice. I need equal rights and justice. Yeah, equal rights and justice. Yeah, equal rights.
That is what he was fighting for, and we fight for today.
Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Everybody wants to go up to heaven. I say, yeah.
When it comes to achieving great things, you cannot be afraid to actually fight for what you believe in.
I need
Equal rights.
and justice.
Back the culture show. You cannot be afraid. Stand up strong.
I see them coming after my soul, wanting to take control. Wanna give me laughs, wanna give me bling, wanna give me all the material things. I hear them talking about what the world has to offer. Girl, what you doing? Don't you see what they have done to Bedouin and Marcus, Jesus, and all of the prophets?
For we today.
But I'm not afraid, no. No, I'm not afraid. No, I'm not afraid, no. If them a come, let them come, 'cause I'm protected by the Most High One. They don't mind when you fall behind and can't pay your bills on time. Prostituting us.
That's right,
them government lines.
You cannot be afraid.
And they don't mind.
You gotta stand up and fight.
I'm coming up with some stupid lines, influencing the youth.
We have the power within us to make that change that we deserve, that we want.
When you're locked up in jail, can't get no bail, sentence for life. I can't see you.
You cannot be afraid. Let's fight together.
Don't let the obstacles of life get you down.
Let's fight this battle together. We will be triumphant.
Don't let the things they say and do
weaken your heart and conquer you.
just make your life forever true.
And I know Jah will see you through.
They all wanna see you fall and stumble along the way, yeah.
But Jah is great, keep the faith, He'll guide you day by day.
Get on up, stand up, fight back.
Get on up, stand up, fight back. The legacy continues. The great Marcus Garvey.
Don't let the things they say and do
weaken your heart and conquer you.
just make your life forever true.
And I know Jah will see you through.
They all wanna see you fall and stumble along the way, yeah.
But Jah is great, keep the faith, He'll guide you day by day.
Get on up, stand up, fight back. Don't give in, no. Get on up, stand up, fight back. Fight to win, yeah. Get on up, stand up, fight back. Don't give in, no. Get on up, stand up, and don't be a fool this time. No, no, no.
Once again, team, you did it again. Charles, thank you so much for being a visionary, putting this show together, the Back the Culture Show, Jamaica National Era Series. the viewers and listeners around the world, we say thank you.
Get on up, stand up, fight back, fight to win, yeah. Get on up, stand up, fight
We still have more show to come.
Get on up, stand up.
But until next time,
Be a fool this time.
love each other, spread love, stand for something. We will catch you on the next Back the Culture show. Mass Control takes over.
Your heart